The court said it was just a petty theft, nothing big, nothing serious, but behind closed doors, the trial was part of a quiet plan to seize an entire black neighborhood, one charge at a time. And Elijah Brooks, a 17-year-old honor student, was chosen to be the first name sacrificed. Can one sister's fight for justice bring down a system built to bury the truth before it buries her brother for good? If stories like this move you, hit the like button, drop a comment, and subscribe to Mr. Mac Stories. Your support helps us keep sharing voices that matter. Now let's rewind to the day Elijah's name was written into a case file and his future nearly erased. In a corner of Westridge, where the sidewalks cracked with age and the street lamps flickered like they were tired of being ignored, lived a boy who never asked for much. Elijah Brooks was 17, thin, soft-spoken, and so easy to overlook that most people did, but not his neighbors, because while the world around them was falling apart, Elijah fixed things. Old radios, broken microwaves, a fan that hadn't spun since Clinton was in office. Elijah could bring it all back to life, not for money, not for recognition, just because he could, and because it made him feel useful in a place that too often made people feel small. He was the kind of kid who never skipped school, always raised his hand in science class, and still walked his mother to the bus stop when she worked the night shift. He didn't smoke, he didn't fight, he kept his hood up and his head down. That's how boys like him stayed out of trouble. But Elijah had dreams that reached beyond the cracked pavement of Westridge. He wanted to study mechanical engineering. He had a folder under his mattress filled with college brochures and scholarship essays, some of them already stained with red pen from his sister Amara, who said, "Dream bigger. You're not just smart, you're sharp." He believed her. And on most days when the world didn't push too hard, Elijah believed in the possibility of getting out of building something that lasted. Westridge, though, had other plans. The neighborhood was under review. According to a sign posted quietly at the community center a few months back, what that really meant was developers want the land and the city wants them to have it. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. Code violations suddenly piled up. Trash pickups got skipped. And the police who used to ignore Westridge now made daily rounds, handing out citations like candy. Still, Elijah kept going. On a Thursday afternoon in late fall, the sky hung low and gray, like it might rain, but couldn't quite decide. Elijah had stayed late after school helping his physics teacher pack up supplies. He didn't rush. He never did. At 4:00 p.m., he walked into a corner store near the school. He bought a bag of chips, a Gatorade, and a small pack of AA batteries. He was trying to fix the old remote at home. The clerk nodded at him. Elijah said thank you. He left. The camera above the door showed him walking out at 4:03 p.m. No yelling, no theft, no sign of trouble. Just a quiet boy with a backpack slung over one shoulder and a dream in his heart, heading home before the streetlights flickered on. What Elijah didn't know, what no one could have imagined, was that within the next 12 minutes, a theft would be reported at that same store and his name would be the first one they wrote down. At exactly 4:15 p.m. Just 12 minutes after Elijah walked out of the corner store, the clerk behind the counter noticed something missing. It wasn't anything big, maybe a Bluetooth speaker, maybe a charger box, he couldn't quite say. But he panicked. He'd had trouble before in this neighborhood, and the new store manager had made it clear. No more excuses. Call it in. So he did. When officers arrived, the clerk gave them what little he had. There was a kid earlier, maybe 17, hoodie gray, I think. He didn't know the name, he didn't have a face, but what he offered was enough. A vague silhouette, just detailed enough to fit a dangerous assumption. Within the hour, a police cruiser rolled down Edison Street, past the rusting mailboxes and the old basketball hoop that no one used anymore. It stopped in front of the Brooks household where Elijah sat at the kitchen table peeling the backing off an old remote control, trying to get the battery springs to snap back into place. His mom had just made tea. The house smelled like cinnamon and floor cleaner. When the knock came, it wasn't frantic. It was official, two officers' calm, friendly voices. "We just need to ask your son a few questions. It's probably nothing." They didn't say what it was about. They didn't say he was a suspect, and they didn't invite his mother to come along. Inside the cruiser, Elijah looked out the window as the houses passed by. He clutched his backpack and thought about the math quiz he hadn't studied for. He didn't say a word, not because he was hiding anything, he just didn't know what this was. At the station, he was led to a room that smelled faintly of coffee and bleach. No one offered him water. No one explained his rights in full. Instead, a form was slid across the table with a pen on top. Statement of presence. It said, I confirm that I was at the 4th and Main convenience store around the time of the reported incident. Elijah blinked. Reported incident. What incident? He opened his mouth to ask, but the officer leaned in with a tight smile, just a formality. We're not saying you did anything. This just helps us place the timeline. You want to help us, right? He thought of his mom, of Amara, of what they'd say if he caused more trouble by not cooperating. So he nodded, picked up the pen, and signed his name. As he placed the pen down, he hesitated just for a second. There was this tightening in his chest like a thread pulling inward, something not quite right, but he swallowed it. Back at home, his mom stood by the stove, phone in hand, her tea gone cold. She called Amara once, no answer, twice, straight to voicemail. On the 3rd call, her daughter picked up Ma. Her voice was groggy. She'd been studying late the night before, but when she heard the words police and Elijah and they took him, Amara sat straight up. Did he have a lawyer? Was anyone there with him? The silence on the other end told her everything. She didn't even say goodbye. She just grabbed her bag and keys. At the station, Elijah was moved into a holding room. A file was open, a case number assigned. Outside, the streetlights had started to hum, and just like that, Elijah Brooks became more than a student, more than a brother. He became a name on a report built on shadows and assumptions. A target in a system that never asked if he belonged, only if he looked like someone who could judge Mason. Carter wore his black robe-like armor. His hair silver and always perfectly combed gave him an air of wisdom. His voice, slow and measured, could hush a courtroom with a single word. To the public, he was a man of law, of order, someone who'd spent 30 years in the justice system, first as a tough-on crime prosecutor, then as a district judge known for his efficiency. But behind closed doors, Mason Carter wasn't driven by justice. He was driven by numbers, by favors, and by the kind of backroom conversations that never made it into court transcripts. Westridge. The neighborhood Elijah called home was part of a quiet plan that had been years in the making. To developers, it was a prime opportunity close to downtown, full of low-income properties and just neglected enough to be bought cheap to the city. It was a burden, a blot on the map, an area they could clean up in exchange for campaign donations and tax deals. But there was one problem. You can't just evict families from their homes without cause. You need leverage. You need justification. You need the narrative. And that's where Judge Carter came in. He wasn't just a gatekeeper. He was the architect of the story. A story where Westridge was becoming too dangerous, where crime was on the rise, where the statistics, carefully selected and padded, would paint the picture they needed. To get that story, they didn't need actual criminals. They just needed enough arrests, enough convictions, enough headline. Teenagers like Elijah were perfect. They didn't have criminal records. They weren't gang members, but they were black. They lived in the right zip code. And most importantly, no one with power would fight for them. When Elijah's name came across Judge Carter's desk, he barely glanced at the details. Petty theft, no priors. A student didn't matter. He'd seen this type before, quiet, respectful, straight-A kids who still somehow fit the profile. And in the judge's mind, the sooner they were processed, the better. So he marked the case for expedited hearing. No time for review. No request for independent counsel. He even had a note sent to the DA's office. Pursue full penalty. No diversion. It wasn't personal. It was practical. Each conviction added another checkmark to a chart, another argument for declaring Westridge a designated high-risk zone. Once that designation passed, everything else would fall into play. Emergency redevelopment rights, easier property seizures, federal urban grant dollars flowing into the hands of private developers. Judge Carter didn't care who lost their homes. He didn't care that Elijah had a scholarship application waiting on his desk at home. He didn't care that a quiet boy fixing broken radios was about to be broken himself. All he saw was a name and an opportunity. In his chambers, with the blinds drawn and a bourbon sweating beside his legal briefs, Judge Carter picked up Elijah's file again. He skimmed it, circled a sentence in red ink. Subject confirmed presence at scene, no alibi provided. Then he shut the folder and smiled. In his version of justice, some people weren't meant to win. The courtroom was cold. Not just from the air conditioning that hummed too loud, but from the way people avoided meeting Elijah's eyes, like they already knew the verdict, like he wasn't a boy. They only saw a name in a file. It had been less than 5 days since Elijah was taken in. Yet here he was standing before Judge Mason Carter in a preliminary hearing that moved with suspicious speed. No one had time to prepare, least of all his family. Elijah's mother sat 2 rows back, her hands trembling in her lap. She'd called 3 lawyers. 2 didn't answer. One wanted a $5,000 retainer just to review the case. In the end, they got a court-appointed attorney. Nice enough, but overworked, distracted. He called Elijah Eli twice, something no one in his family had ever done. Before the hearing began, the attorney whispered, "Just stay quiet, let me do the talking. We'll try to get this pushed out," but there was no pushing anything. Judge Carter entered like he owned the air in the room. He adjusted his robe, tapped his gavel. "Once we'll move swiftly. This is a straightforward case," he said. Straightforward. That was the word he used to describe a boy's future. The prosecution stepped up, first speaking with calm, rehearsed confidence. They had a theory now. Elijah had come into the store at 4 p.m., scoped the place out, bought snacks to avoid suspicion, then circled back minutes later and stole electronics. No forced entry, no broken displays. Just someone who knew the layout, the DA said, eyes cold as glass. Elijah's attorney tried to introduce the security footage, the one showing Elijah leaving at exactly 4:03 p.m. Judge Carter interrupted. "Is this timestamp verified by a technician?" When the answer was no, he waved it off. Unverified digital media holds no weight in this court. Then came the student testimonies. 2 classmates who said Elijah had walked home with them nowhere near the store when the alleged theft occurred. The DA objected hearsay from peers with potential bias sustained. It was like trying to breathe underwater. Every piece of truth Elijah brought forward was swatted down before it could land. Finally, when the attorney faltered, Elijah spoke up. "Your Honor, I didn't do this. Judge Carter didn't even lift his head. "Speak only when asked, Mr. Brooks." The courtroom went quiet, not in respect, in resignation, like everyone had seen this before. Just another at-risk youth in the wrong place at the wrong time. Elijah looked over at his mother. Her eyes were full but dry, like she had no tears left to give. And beside her, Amara had just arrived, still in her law school sweatshirt, breathless from the train, clutching a binder she hadn't even opened yet. She looked at the judge, then at her brother, then at the evidence table empty. She knew this wasn't a trial. This was a script, and the ending had already been written. The news didn't knock, it barged in. By sunrise, Elijah's name had already made the rounds. Black honor student arrested for theft. That was all it took. They didn't mention the lack of evidence. They didn't say the hearing lasted barely 15 minutes. They just showed his school photo. One where he wasn't even smiling, and let the assumptions write themselves. His mother stopped answering the phone. People weren't calling to ask if she was okay. They were calling to confirm what they already wanted to believe. The neighbors who used to wave now pulled their curtains shut. A woman Elijah once helped carry groceries across the street instead of walking past their porch. The shame wasn't loud. It was quiet, persistent, and cruel. Inside the house, Elijah sat by the window, knees pulled up, chin resting on his arms. He didn't speak much, didn't eat unless reminded. Just stared out like maybe if he waited long enough, the world would reset itself. His mother cried in the kitchen shoulders, hunched, wiping her face with the same towel she used for the dishes. The silence between them was a kind of grief, one too heavy for words. That's when Amara arrived. She'd taken the last train from D.C., still in her campus hoodie, no sleep, no plan. Just fire, not the kind that burns everything down, the kind that waits, watches, warms up slowly. She didn't speak when she entered. She just dropped her bag, looked around the living room and felt something odd. This wasn't just about a charge. It was an erasure. She found Elijah in his room. He looked up briefly, then looked away. "Hey, kid." His voice cracked when he asked, "Do you believe me?" Amara didn't answer with a speech. She sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder, and said quietly, "Yeah, I do." He nodded just once. That was enough. Later that evening, she asked for everything: papers, notes, the court summary. She flipped through them with quiet focus. Then she found it. Expedited review. No defense motion, no timestamp validation. It didn't feel like oversight. It felt like design. She opened her can, typed in the court system. Case after case. Teenagers, all from Westridge, all flagged high priority, all fast-tracked. It didn't make sense unless she remembered a panel she attended last year. Judge Mason Carter had spoken, praised for his fast handling of juvenile crime, a man who prided himself on reducing backlogs. But this wasn't a backlog. This was a strategy. She looked back at Elijah's file, circled a phrase, subject confirmed presence at scene. One line. That's all it took to turn a boy into a suspect. She closed the folder slowly. Her jaw tightened. This isn't justice, she whispered. This is paperwork pretending to be justice. She didn't tell their mother what she was thinking. Didn't tell Elijah either. Not yet, but something had shifted. A quiet click deep inside her. They wanted Elijah to vanish quietly. They wanted him to fold. They had no idea his sister studied law like it was war. Amara didn't sleep that night. While the rest of the house fell into a silence broken only by the ticking of the old kitchen clock, she sat at the dining table with her laptop open and a legal pad half filled with scribbles, arrows, and question marks. She started with the basics. She requested a copy of the surveillance footage from the convenience store. Not the edited clip presented in court, but the full time-stamped recording. She compared it against Elijah's signed statement and noticed something small but telling. The footage showed Elijah exiting at exactly 4:03 p.m. The incident was reported at 4:15 p.m., but the police report had blurred that line, listing only that subject was present near time of offense. That word near was doing too much work. Next, she tracked down the witness report from the store clerk. It had been filed hastily, almost like a template. Male black-gray hoodie seemed nervous. No name, no height, no clear identifiers. Still, it was enough to set things in motion. She called a classmate who had walked with Elijah that day. "You sure it was after the store?" Amara asked. "Yes, I remember because he was chewing chips and told me to save him a spot in physics." That wasn't in the report. She then requested the court transcript from the initial hearing just to confirm a feeling she couldn't shake. And there it was. The judge had cut off the defense before they could even validate the footage's timestamp. The prosecution's timeline was built on suggestion, not evidence. But no one questioned it because no one was expected to. Still, legal inconsistencies weren't enough. She needed to prove why this was happening, so she went deeper. She accessed the public records database, dry endless PDFs of land assessments, zoning board meetings, and developer permits. And after 2 hours of skimming, line after line, she found it. A proposed redevelopment plan titled West Haven Renewal Project. Filed under a shell company approved by the Zoning Commission 6 months ago. Its centerpiece, a mixed-use luxury complex on the exact blocks that included Westridge. The document cited rising crime statistics as part of the justification. That was the first red flag. Then came the second. One of the project's early legal consultants had been listed as Carter and Associates. It was a name Amara hadn't seen since law school reading assignments. A firm dissolved 10 years ago right after Mason Carter accepted his judicial appointment. But the money didn't disappear. The firm's residual accounts still received quarterly advisory payments, now redirected to a private trust under Carter's wife's name. The trust's name, Marion West Holdings, same initials as the developer, West Haven Realty. And there it was, not just motive paperwork dates, transfers, trails, a web. Amara sat back, exhaled slowly, and rubbed her eyes. She wasn't imagining things. She wasn't just angry. This wasn't carelessness. This was systematic, deliberate. She pulled out her phone, opened the camera. Snap, snap, snap. Screenshots, PDFs, transaction logs, every detail, every breadcrumb. Then in the corner of her screen, she opened a blank email draft. The subject line, request for urgent review, judicial misconduct, and civil rights violation. She didn't send it yet, but the fire was no longer quiet. Amara wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. She was preparing for war. Amara didn't sleep the next night either. By morning, she had compiled 43 pages of documentation, timestamps, testimony, inconsistencies, court transcripts, zoning board approvals, financial transfers, and screenshots from public records. Every line was labeled, every claim backed by something real. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was undeniable. She stared at the subject line in her email. Request for urgent review, judicial misconduct, and civil rights violation. She hesitated just 1 second longer, then hit send. The email landed in the inbox of the Civil Rights Legal Defense Fund, a nonprofit legal organization with a reputation for taking on cases others were too afraid or too slow to touch. They called her back within 2 hours. The voice on the other end was sharp, professional, and serious. "Ms. Brooks, we've reviewed your summary, and we need to see everything you have immediately." By that evening, Amara was in a video call with 3 attorneys from the organization, 2 legal analysts, and 1 retired federal judge acting as counsel. She walked them through everything step by step. No drama, just facts, and by the time she was done, no one was speaking. Then the senior counsel said it plainly. This isn't just overreach, it's orchestration. The team moved fast. They began drafting a federal complaint alleging violation of Elijah Brooks' constitutional rights under the 6th and 14th Amendments, right to legal representation and due process, abuse of judicial authority by Judge Mason Carter, and systemic manipulation of case scheduling to target and displace a marginalized community. The filing included a motion to immediately suspend Judge Carter from the bench, pending investigation citing credible evidence of conflict of interest and obstruction of justice. Amara sat in silence, listening to legal terms being turned into legal weapons. Not because she didn't understand she did, but because for the first time in weeks, she wasn't the only one fighting. The attorneys asked for Elijah's testimony. She hesitated. He's been through enough, but then she paused. No, he needs to see this. He needs to be part of it. Because silence was what they were counting on, and silence wasn't safety, it was surrender. By Friday morning, the federal lawsuit had been filed with the U.S. District Court. It was assigned a case number, and Judge Mason Carter received formal notice of the complaint. A request for temporary suspension of judicial duties was submitted to the State Disciplinary Board. Westridge didn't know it yet, but something had cracked. The story was no longer just about a boy accused of stealing. It was about a court that stole something far more dangerous, the assumption that no one would fight back. The courtroom was different this time. It wasn't the cramped, tired space of the local courthouse where Elijah had first stood alone. This was the U.S. District Court downtown. High ceilings, heavy oak benches, and a seal of the United States gleaming behind the judge's bench. The air itself felt heavier, more real. The pews were filled not with neighbors, but with reporters, legal observers, civil rights advocates, and students who had heard about the case and come to watch history crack open. Judge Mason Carter sat at the defense table not behind the bench, not in his robes, but in a navy suit that somehow made him look smaller. Beside him, his private attorney whispered furiously, flipping through folders that suddenly seemed far too thin. Across from them, the legal team from the Civil Rights Legal Defense Fund spread out binders inches thick. At the center of it all sat Amara. Elijah sat beside her, dressed in his Sunday best tie, slightly crooked, hands folded tight. But he held his head high. The presiding federal judge, a stern woman with sharp glass, called the hearing to order. We are here today to address allegations of judicial misconduct, constitutional violations, and conflict of interest involving Judge Mason Carter of the East Bridge County Court. It wasn't a trial, not yet, but it was a reckoning. The government's counsel began systematically presenting the evidence. First, the surveillance footage, full time-stamped indisputable. Played on a large screen, it showed Elijah walking out of the store at exactly 4:03 p.m., a full 12 minutes before the theft was reported. Then the witness report riddled with inconsistencies and vague descriptions lacking any concrete identification. Then the court transcript from Elijah's first hearing, highlighting how Judge Carter had interrupted and dismissed defense attempts to introduce exonerating evidence. Each slide, each document, each soundbite felt like a hammer hitting stone. And then came the heavy blow, a chart mapping financial transactions traced from West Haven Realty through shell companies back to a trust fund tied to Judge Carter's immediate family. The courtroom murmured, reporters' pens scratched faster. Judge Carter's face tightened. He shifted in his seat. For the first time in decades, he wasn't the one commanding the room. He was the one explaining himself, and he wasn't doing it well. When questioned, he fumbled, I don't recall the specifics. Those payments were consulting fees long before my appointment. I didn't personally manage that account. Each answer only dug the hole deeper. Amara watched, heart pounding, but steady. Not with revenge, with something quieter, fiercer, restoration. Finally, the federal judge spoke. Given the credible evidence presented of misconduct, financial conflict, and constitutional rights violations, this court moves to dismiss all charges against Elijah Brooks with prejudice. Furthermore, a formal apology will be issued by the state judiciary on behalf of this court. The words didn't echo. They landed solid and final. Elijah squeezed Amara's hand under the table. Not hard, just enough to say, "We made it." The federal judge turned toward Judge Carter one last time. "You are hereby suspended pending a full disciplinary review. This court will recommend disbarment and potential criminal investigation." It wasn't just a victory, it was a vindication. Outside, the courthouse steps buzzed with news cameras and chants. But inside, Elijah stood quietly, letting the truth settle around him like armor. He wasn't just a name in a file anymore. He was a name cleared, a name reclaimed. The courthouse steps felt taller that afternoon. Not because Elijah stood any higher, but because for the first time in a long time he wasn't standing alone. Reporters crowded near the entrance, shoving microphones forward, shouting questions. Most of them pointed toward Amara. At first she hesitated. She wasn't the one who needed the spotlight, but she knew this moment wasn't about her pride, it was about the message. She stepped forward, cleared her throat, and spoke into the cluster of cameras. Justice isn't real until it's demanded by those who were never given it. The words rang clear. No script, no teleprompter, just truth. She continued, voice steady. Today wasn't just about clearing Elijah's name. It was about reminding the city that convenience does not excuse injustice, that expediency does not excuse erasure, and that silence is not consent. Some in the crowd nodded. Some scribbled furiously into notepads. Some simply watched the way people watch something they can't pretend not to see anymore. Across town, word traveled faster than any newspaper headline. At Eastbridge High, Elijah returned to campus the following week. No handcuffs, no whispered rumors, just cautious, lingering glances. His teachers, who once looked past him, now sought him out in the halls. Good to have you back, Elijah. Heard you held your ground. If you ever want to talk about college options, my door's open. Some of the students who had kept their distance offered nods, half smiles, small gestures that, while late, were honest. It wasn't worship. It wasn't pity. It was respect. Meanwhile, in Westridge, the ripple became a wave. The residents who had spent months swallowing their frustrations started showing up at city meetings. They brought signs. They asked hard questions. Why was crime data used to justify a redevelopment we never asked for? Where are the community protections in your new plan? How many more boys like Elijah were sacrificed for a better image? The city officials fumbled for answers. The developers stalled. The zoning proposal, the one that had been considered a formality, was suddenly under review. For the first time, the people of Westridge weren't just on defense. They were standing on the record, and they had witnesses. Justice didn't end with Elijah's name being cleared. It had only begun. Amara knew there was still a long fight ahead, policy reparations reform. But as she watched her brother walk across the quad with his backpack slung over one shoulder, laughing quietly with a friend, she allowed herself a rare moment of certainty. The system had tried to bury him, but he had become something they hadn't planned for, a seed, and now he was growing. Spring came slowly to Westridge that year, not because the flowers hesitated, but because people were still learning how to bloom again. For Elijah Brooks, the season brought something else too, something he hadn't dared to imagine just months earlier. A letter embossed, formal, sealed with the insignia of the National Civil Rights Foundation. Inside, just 12 simple words. We are honored to offer you a full academic scholarship in engineering. No conditions, no apologies. Just a door opening exactly where another had tried to slam shut. He showed the letter to his mother first. She cried this time, not from fear. Then he showed Amara. She smiled and said, "Told you, Sharp." Across town, Judge Mason Carter wasn't faring as well. Suspended indefinitely, facing formal charges of judicial misconduct, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The city's newspapers, once reluctant to question him, now printed stories daily about the cracks in his legacy, every ribbon-cutting photo, every self-congratulatory award speech. Now a reminder of how easily power could rot when no one was watching. He had tried to bury Elijah, to erase him into the footnotes of someone else's profit plan. But Elijah wasn't lost. He was waiting, growing. The gymnasium at Eastbridge High was packed the evening of graduation. Families fanned themselves with paper programs. Balloons floated lazily toward the rafters. The principal's microphone squeaked once before settling. Names were called one by one, and then Elijah Brooks. He rose. The crowd clapped louder than most. Some cheers even echoed from the back rows. Elijah walked across the stage wearing his black gown, his mortarboard slightly askew. In his hands, he clutched the diploma like a passport. Waiting at the end of the stage, off to the side where families gathered, was Amara. She wasn't waving or crying. She stood there, steady hands tucked into the sleeves of her blazer, smiling in that rare private way she reserved only for him. Their eyes met, no word, just a look of pride, of survival, of knowing. The kind of look that says, "You didn't just survive this. You changed it." Elijah stepped down from the stage and into a future no longer stolen. The sun outside was beginning to set, casting long golden beams across the parking lot. And if anyone had been listening closely in that moment, they might have heard it. Not the applause, not the music, but the quiet truth. They tried to bury him, not knowing he was a seed, and now he was just beginning to rise. Justice isn't something we're given. It's something we fight for, and sometimes the quietest voices carry the strongest truth. Elijah's story reminds us that no matter how heavy the odds, courage, perseverance, and a belief in what's right can break through even the hardest walls. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think a little deeper, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Max Stories for more powerful true-to-life tales. Your support means more than you know. It fuels our passion to keep bringing you stories that lift voices, challenge injustice, and celebrate the resilience of the human spirit. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. And remember, sometimes the world tries to bury you, but that's just the beginning of how you grow.